So I have some time to make a video, so why not just continue with that series of reviewing and ranking SpongeBob episodes, given that most of my public probably comes from the other collaborations still. Well, we're at season 5 now, and I can just say that I'm not a fan of season 5. Just like with season 4, I think it's overrated. Maybe it's because I've seen the episodes too many times, but they are just so boring to me. There's something off about the animation, and the plots don't make up for it. The comedy is probably the best thing here, relatively speaking, to the seasons coming up. But I'm not a fan of it. I think it's way closer in quality to 6 than to 1, 2, 3. So without further ado, let's start the ranking with the first and thereby, in my opinion, the worst episode of the list. Number 41, the original Fry Cook. This is an episode that people tend to forget existed, and when they go back to it, I hear a lot of positive reviews. Well, I forgot it existed as well, and I am pretty sure that I did watch it, unlike some episodes from the earlier seasons that I just had never seen, because I do remember the gag with Squidward's hair, and I remember absolutely nothing else. That's how forgettable this episode is. It is so incredibly boring. I see no value in it at all. On top of that, when I actually watched the episode, it is some of the most infuriating stuff I have ever seen. We have SpongeBob acting like a complete idiot, thinking that someone is taking his job that gives no indication of ever doing so. However, what I do understand from SpongeBob's perspective is that he feels inferior to Jim, and that sucks. And Jim does nothing to make him feel better. He is just completely a jerk and telling him that SpongeBob indeed sucks, while at the same time, at the point where SpongeBob walks away for a second, he tells Krabs that SpongeBob has potential and should just leave the Krusty Krab. Why not tell him that in his face? You want him to suffer just as much as you did at the hands of Mr. Krabs? Jim, you're a dick. And Jim doesn't teach SpongeBob any lessons about life or whatever, as I heard people say. It is complete other crap. He basically knows SpongeBob has potential and he refuses to tell him. He waits until SpongeBob leaves the room for a second and then he says it to Mr. Krabs. So he's essentially condemning his successor at the Krusty Krab to an inferiority complex and to exploitation by Krabs that he himself got out of. Oh wait, we don't have to worry about SpongeBob having an inferiority complex as it is set up throughout the episode, making you feel bad for him, because as soon as Krabs says, oh well, Jim won't take your job because you're cheaper than him, as soon as Krabs says that, SpongeBob is back to being happy. Don't you love it when your characters are motivated? I'm sorry, I absolutely hate this episode so much. It is absolutely one of the most underrated episodes in the entire series, and definitely the worst by far of this season. Whew, glad that's done. Which episode's next? Fungus Among Us is so disgusting, and at the same time it is so boring. I hate the idea of having these kind of substances on me and not getting them off. I've seen substances in my life that look like this. I think I've had them on my hands, and I'm germophobic, so this is really uncomfortable for me. And the worst part is when the customers start eating the food with the fungi in it. You see them chewing on the food, swallowing it. I just want to vomit. What's in this? It is so horrible. And then all these customers decide to jump on SpongeBob for giving them the egg. Why? That will only spread more fungus on you and on everyone else. And what does it matter that the fungus in the end spreads everywhere into the Krusty Krab when SpongeBob's bubble breaks, because Gary comes in to lick it off anyways, and they are already covered in fungus. The only reason it's here is to be gross, because it doesn't add to the plot in any way. This episode is awful, and I apologize for even showing footage of it. And now we get to number 39, whatever happened to SpongeBob. I have less to say here. It's not the worst thing ever. It doesn't make me angry. It is just so boring. And it seems like it's going to be this big adventure, but nothing about the story or the setting is really well developed or interesting. They either disagreed on what to do with this episode or went over it multiple times, and it resulted in this mess that is bad at everything it tries to do. Okay, up to number 38 we have Breath of Fresh Squidward. A lot of people really hate this episode and some other people enjoy it, and I can see both perspectives. It is one of the more entertaining and one of the more interesting episodes of the season. I think the night atmosphere throughout the end really helps. But at the same time, yeah, SpongeBob is being such a jerk and a hypocrite for hating on Squidward and basically telling him that it's not okay for Squidward to be happy and be like him. But the thing that irritates me personally is that they have SpongeBob act like this baby throughout the entire episode. He chases Squidward out of his own party with this annoying tantrum, makes him cry, and no one cares apparently. And then SpongeBob, just out of nowhere, starts acting like the adult in the room. Oh, I should apologize to Squidward, he is also welcome. It is so obnoxious to have your main character act so irritating and then suddenly have him act like the grown adult again. No, he's the child in this situation. Don't imply that he's the sane one. Number 37 is Atlantis Squarepants. Another very disappointing special. This is like the longest amount of boredom you will get from SpongeBob, because it is like 40 minutes, 50 minutes of pure nothingness. Even for 11 minutes, which this episode was initially intended to be, I still think that there isn't much going on in terms of plot or comedy. But the reason why it's higher than whatever happened to SpongeBob is only that the songs are so bad that they're actually kind of funny. Other than that, I really dislike everything. The visuals are bland and boring. The Betsy segments are really stupid and boring. The ending fight scene is underwhelming and it glorifies Sandy, which I already hated in Karate Island. Yeah, this is a really bad episode and I don't blame anyone for having it even lower. Number 36, SpongeHands is just boring and depressing and dark and not pleasant at all. I do think there's some artistic value in it, so that's why it's not even lower, but it's really nothing I want to see again. Number 35 is To Save a Squirrel. This episode has a lot of jokes that are almost funny, but not entirely, just like Krabs vs. Plankton from last season. And it also has a lot of SpongeBob screaming and Patrick screaming at the beginning. And it has this minute-long sequence of Patrick having to think, which is just such a pathetic way to fill in the runtime. And it makes me so mad that it makes me put it all the way in the bottom 10. And on top of that, there also isn't much explanation. It doesn't make sense. Why is Sandy the Hermit? It doesn't matter to the plot in any way. There's no sort of foreshadowing to this twist. And why is there a cricket underwater? Number 34 is The Krusty Sponge. This episode was off to a good start. I like Squidward's sarcasm and his snide remarks. I like this critic guy who comes in the Krusty Krab to see how their food is. And I like the satire and self-awareness about SpongeBob's over-merchandising. But unfortunately, the episode just isn't funny beyond that. I think the atmosphere is terrible, which is an issue I have with a lot of this season. The zombies look a bit gross, and most importantly, Squidward gets tortured way too much, and at the end where you think Krabs is getting what he deserves, they suddenly end it with Squidward taking that punishment, and it's very irritating and unfunny. I don't see why they would do it, and yeah, this episode is therefore really bad. Number 33 is Sing a Song of Patrick. This episode is really disgusting, with Patrick burping and the poem being represented as a used diaper. It's mean-spirited because Patrick treats SpongeBob terribly and he himself gets attacked by people with dodgeballs, which is also mean. And the worst thing is the song. The song is played so incredibly, insanely loud that it hurts my ears. And the lyrics are clearly trying to be funny, but it's just way too obvious that this is not someone who actually seriously wrote the song. The appeal of cringe comedy is that you make it so that the character, even if the character has to be dumb for that, the character actually is being serious while doing this. It is you making a joke as a writer. But here it just feels so obvious that this is not something that anyone wrote seriously, that it isn't funny in any way. Number 32 is Good Old What's His Name. I don't have much to say here. It's just a boring episode. The atmosphere is again pretty bad. And yeah, Squidward gets unfairly treated at the end. And it was also predictable that Krabs was not going to give away an actual cruise. Number 31, The Big Switch, has two different subplots going on, and neither of the two is really developed. Neither is the overall premise. It's just an exchange program, right? So why does everyone treat it as if SpongeBob is traded permanently? The character designs for the fancy people is just normal character designs you will see at the Krusty Krab, except they have a suit on instead of, unique character designs. The only redeeming quality in this episode is Krabs being cheap with the furniture. That was a funny joke, but it's not enough. This episode isn't frustrating, but it just has nothing good going on to make it anything other than a bad episode. Number 30 is To Love a Patty. This is the episode that is so bad that it's kind of funny. But only kind of, it's still a pretty bad episode. Especially the part where SpongeBob murders a clam is just weird. It's really unsettling. And as a whole, this whole premise is stupid. Why would SpongeBob fall in love with food that he cooks every day? But it is kind of funny to see him sing about how much he loved his Paddy in a song that is very cringe, but in a way where it's cringe comedy doing right, in that I actually believe that the character wrote this awfully terrible song. And I also found it funny to see Patrick say that he's replaced by a sandwich. But yeah, it's still a bad episode. And the Paddy looks disgusting. Number 29 is Goo Goo Gas. I think there are a lot of funny jokes in this episode, like Krabs pointing out Plankton is wearing a grinder with his initial on it, and the Plankton just falling out of the handcuffs. But there are far more jokes that is just disgusting, fart jokes and annoying baby stuff, which I really dislike. And the atmosphere is just so hideous as well. And on a side note, why did Plankton, when he turns into a baby at the end, not turn into his kid self from another episode that is coming up? Number 28 is Pet No Pay. This episode is kind of annoying, but it only lasts for a few minutes, so it's not too bad. The ending, you can see it coming as soon as SpongeBob has to put the money in the safe. The safe is also behind Mr. Krabs, so why does he walk past the dumpster? You know, it doesn't matter, it's a boring episode. Not much to say here. Number 27 is Nightlight. This episode has SpongeBob and Patrick act very immature and they scream a lot, and that's not fun. But what I do like is that Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy show up, and it's funny to see them chase the moth villain. I also think the ending where Patrick tries to catch the sun and walks up when the sun comes up is pretty funny, but that's about it. Not much else is good here. Number 26 is the Krusty Plate. This episode is very short and they only have one joke that isn't really funny and neither is it frustrating, but I do feel like they waste the potential to make a joke about SpongeBob being a sponge, using a sponge. Number 25 is Friend or Foe. This episode has a pretty big story with Plankton and Krabs' backstory, how they become rivals and stuff. And while I appreciate the attempt, they clearly put some more effort into it because it's the season opener. I don't think they did it all too well. Firstly, this episode isn't that funny, especially in the flashback scenes there isn't much comedy, but the Pepsi scenes are funny, but those are just a minor part. And secondly, when it comes to the actual story of how Krabs and Plankton became rivals, it also doesn't go far enough in my opinion, and the side characters, their classmates that bully them, they're just so underdeveloped that there's nothing interesting going on in the whole episode, in my opinion. And on top of that, I think the color palette is really bad and it just shows us how the whole season is going to be very bland and not fun to look at and just bad atmosphere all throughout. Of course, I wanted to say that this episode is as good as people say it is and that it is a touching story, just like with Have You Seen the Snail, but it just isn't. Number 24 is Stanley as Squarepants. Stanley is annoying and he gets on your nerves. At the same time, there's a few funny jokes, like Patrick talking about the immobile arts and Sandy flying up in the sky, but I doubt it was worth the annoyance. Number 23 is the Battle of Bikini Bottom. This episode's first half is super boring and the atmosphere is again very bad. And the second half is more entertaining. I think SpongeBob antics in the fight are really cool. But Patrick, yeah, that's just gross. So please don't do it. The ending resolution where they both realize that now they're so clean and dirty respectively that they can only get dirtier and cleaner respectively is kind of funny. So I have to give it that. Number 22, Crab Cellar Mode, has a very nice and cozy atmosphere. It looks really beautiful in the Krusty Krab when it's under the ice and in the end also when it's underwater. So yeah, I have to give it that in contrast to the other episodes this season. But when you look at the plot, it's very cookie cutter and I don't find anything to be funny. Every time I watch it, I want to find something I like and I just can't. At least not enough to justify this being an actual TV episode. And not to mention how gross some of the jokes are. Number 21 is Boat Smart. It is a Squidward torture episode, but at the same time it's clear they're just trying to do some slapstick and you shouldn't think about it that much. But again, Squidward is following decent driving tips and he gets punished for it, so it does feel a bit unfair. And some of the moments also do feel a bit painful to watch. So I put it here in the middle because I have mixed feelings about the same one joke that they keep telling in the episode. Number 20 is Rise and Shine. Another shorter episode that has one joke that I can see people finding really funny, or really annoying, and I think my opinion on it differs by the day or something. I don't have an opinion on it. Number 19, 20,000 Patties Under the Sea, is a pretty boring episode with bad atmosphere, but some really funny jokes. We all know the roasting session, and there's also SpongeBob referring to things sticking out of the ground, and then Patrick thinks it's Squidward. That was also really funny. Number 18 is SpongeBob versus the Patty Gadget. This episode has a rhyming narration, which is pretty awesome, but other than that, there isn't any comedy or an interesting story, so to speak. It's just an okay episode. Number 17 is Money Talks. The money is really annoying, the atmosphere is terrible, but Mr. Krabs' song at the beginning, and then Patrick coming out, oh, what did I miss? And then he starts to sing it again. Okay, yeah, that was okay. Number 16 is Waiting. Another short episode with one joke that you can either find really funny or really frustrating. But I lean a lot towards funny, especially with Patrick with the fork and the cake. That was really funny in my opinion, that bit. But the ending is really annoying where they're crying a lot and Squidward has to save them by putting the toy back on. And yeah, there's a button on the toy that they don't press, even though it seems like that can bring it back as well, and they don't even try that. Number 15 is Bucket Sweet Bucket. This episode is decent and has some funny jokes. At the same time, it is kind of boring, it feels very mundane as a plot, and the jokes don't make up for it to make it a good episode either. Number 14 is The Inmates of Summer. This episode has a significantly better second half than first half, because the play is pretty funny, but both are kind of average. I think it's very irritating that SpongeBob and Patrick are acting like a bunch of babies who are crying and going on summer camp, but at the same time, put in the situation against these tough guys, the warden and the criminals, it works pretty well. Number 13 is Blackjack. I like this episode, it has a cool story, tension, but at the same time, I think it would be a funny episode because it doesn't have much jokes except for the thing with Uncle Blue who keeps giving him chores. It would be funny if it is known to the audience that Blackjack is this small, but not to SpongeBob, so there would be subtext here. This episode also reminds me of The Sound of Your Heart. That's a Korean comedy show on Netflix that has also an episode where the main character meets his cousins again, except there they went from being the smaller cousins because they were younger to being these buff guys that beat him up and stuff. So there it goes the opposite direction. Number 12 is Best of the West. I know a lot of people don't like this one and some people think it's amazing, and I'm in the middle. I acknowledge that it's kind of boring, doesn't have that many jokes or that many plot going on, but come on, this western atmosphere is just epic and awesome, and as a whole, I think this episode is fun. There are some good jokes in it, and I especially like that they start off with these wraparound segments of SpongeBob feeling like he doesn't have a famous ancestor or anything, and Sandy trying to help him, which is very nice of her. But the actual plot of SpongeBob is also just fun throughout, and I like the song as well that they sing at the ending. I just enjoy this episode, and that's about all I can say. If you don't, I can understand. Number 11 is Slimy Dancing. I have to admit this episode is funny for the most part, but the cramp is really stupid and I find it a bit boring and predictable as a plot. So yeah, Squidward deserves what happens, but it's not really that interesting. Number 10 is Picture Day. I like this idea of having an episode where SpongeBob tries to get ready for something and it keeps going wrong, so he does it all over again. And they execute it okay, but not amazing or anything. But I do think it's a decent enough episode to watch with some good jokes like Patrick forgetting that SpongeBob is in that jar. Even though it did make me a bit uncomfortable, it is kind of funny. Number 9 is Benton Bikini Bottom. The song I have mixed feelings towards. On one hand, it also isn't that pleasant on the ears. On the other, it's kind of funny to listen to as well. It's funny bad. Then there's the atmosphere that is pretty good because they move the Krusty Krab into SpongeBob's home, and there's also some good jokes, especially the one with Patrick, Plankton and the password. What are you talking about, you gargantuan buffoon? Plankton says, and then Patrick is like, oh yeah, that's correct, that's the correct password. So that one was really funny too. So yeah, that's why it's so high. Number 8, Spy Buddies, is very much a mixed bag. I like some of the jokes, like Patrick saying how embarrassing that Plankton shops for baby clothes while in baby clothes. But others of them are just gross, like Patrick with his laser beams out of his butt is just yuck. And that is also a major plot point. And when it comes to the plot, the same thing applies. I like the setup for the plot twist. At the same time, I do not like how in two scenes, first at the beginning and then at the end, it just switches from night to day. So it's like they paid attention to the writing, but also not in other areas. So all of that makes it an okay episode. I can see it being entertaining, but not something amazing or anything, as some people say. Number 7 is Mermaid Man versus SpongeBob. I kind of like the idea of this episode, and I like that they try to involve Plankton here. And there certainly are some decent jokes and entertaining moments in it, but there's also a lot of gross stuff with the dandruff. And as a whole, this plot doesn't feel like it knows where it wants to go. Kind of like me talking here into the recorder. So, but yeah, it's an okay episode, but it just needs a little more to be really good, in my opinion. Number 6 is A Flea in Her Dome. Sure, this episode does not have the best story ever, and in fact, I think it is pretty boring with how they're just staying in the tree dome all the time when you want them to just walk out for those fleas. But you know what? This entire season kind of bored me and isn't the most exciting, also with the animation and the atmosphere being off. And this one is no different, but at least it's funny. I find it super hilarious in the beginning when SpongeBob is crying and then Patrick cheers him up, but then starts crying when he realizes Sandy is gone, and then confuses Sandy's physical features and behavior with Squidward. And also when Patrick starts getting super angry after being stung and he starts scolding Sandy and that she brought fleas and trouble and pain and itching and harass and pain. Oh god, it is so funny. I have no idea how they come up with it, because it actually feels so natural for the character to say it. This is the kind of humor that old SpongeBob was known for, and I like that this episode knew to recapture it there. And as it comes to the flea bites, well, I have a fear of insects, and I will just say that this wasn't scary or gross or in any way to me. It was more like, well, unpleasant as an idea, like you're watching some horror film where they're attacked by aliens. The fleas don't look that gross. The close-ups, sure, they are there, but they don't have any hair on them in my, at least for as far as I can see. They look more like these sort of alien creatures, these monsters that are chasing characters in horror movies, rather than that they look like something that makes me want to throw up or like an actual realistic insect. I think this episode is among the most overrated of the entire series, certainly the most in this season. Number 5 is The Donut of Shame. Donut of Shame has a very interesting plot despite being only a short, and there's also a couple of jokes thrown in there, especially the one with Patrick going up to the attic, realizing he doesn't have it and then trying again because he forgets it. That one really got me, and as a whole it's nice to see Patrick have some sort of conscience and remorse for his actions, and there's also this mysterious vibe around the episode, especially in the beginning, so that's why it's very interesting at least. Number 4 is The Two Faces of Squidward. This episode is rewarding because Squidward finally gets some happiness and appreciation in his life. And of course, because it is still a comedy and we need some conflict because it is television, it ends up not being what he wanted and everyone is going mad over him, which is also pretty funny. Unfortunately, the beginning is very annoying and a bit dragged out, but other than that, I think what we have in the middle part and the ending is pretty well done, especially with how Squidward changes back to normal and that it's not the shoe that was clearly set up earlier, but it is him being thrown against Paul to prevent him from getting the shoe into his face. So yeah, a good episode. Number 3 is New Dicks. This might be the most solid episode of the season, because while a lot of people tend to forget it, and sure it doesn't have any sort of spectacular moments, it is just so decent all around. Firstly, the atmosphere, especially when SpongeBob is laying awake that first night at the Krusty Krab and you have the music playing, that's just gorgeous. And then later on in the Krusty Krab when all the shenanigans ensue, it's also pretty cozy, especially with his parents coming to visit. And speaking of that, this episode is also really funny with a lot of like little laughs, little jokes. For me, the best joke has to be when Krabs accidentally peeks at Mrs. Squarepants and then gets beaten up by Mr. Squarepants. I found it pretty funny. The one joke I didn't like was Patrick's back hair and stuff, but let's just forget that. It's not that big of a deal, and this episode is just a whole vibe throughout. Very solid and decent episode. Number 2 is Black and Sponge, another surprise entry to make it up this high. But this episode is, again, just really funny and really solid. Sure, it's a bit out of character for SpongeBob to want to be a hero and save women and stuff and brag. At the same time, it is pretty funny, especially with everyone's reaction. From Patrick, talking about suing people and made it also dramatic. Sandy immediately assuming that he lost the fight and Gary laughing at him. But best of all, the customers in the Krusty Krab who really do not care at all about this stupid story. And then it turning out to be true as well. Very funny episode and certainly underrated. And SpongeBob acting like a jerk, well, he does get his punishment for it, so that's fine with me. And lastly, number 1, the best episode of season 5 is Roller Cowards. This is a very popular episode and honestly it does deserve most of the praise it gets. This episode is really funny, it is very consistent with its humor and I can't really pinpoint any flaws. I can say that at least in the first half most of the jokes do revolve around SpongeBob and Patrick being scared for the ride. But hey, this is season 5. There's so many episodes revolving around just one joke. And the jokes they tell here are just funny. And as I may add, it also tells a decent story about two friends that both feel pressured into doing something they think the other one likes, that they are afraid of. And when they confess it and think they're coped out of it, they subvert your expectations and have the right run again. I will stand by the opinion that this episode is not special in any way. Just like the previous ones, it's just solid all throughout. And if this came out in season 1, 2 or 3, people would just find it an okay episode. Okay, this certainly isn't some sort of amazing episode that is on the level of pre-movie or the better pre-movie stuff. No, this would definitely be forgotten. It would be like Missing Identity or something. And most of the other popular season 5 episodes that people consider to be pre-movie tier are very, well, mediocre at best and just bad at worst. Yeah, I'm not a fan of season 5 as you can notice, and I think this season is really boring. And it's not so much the few episodes that I hate, that everyone else hates, Atlantis Squarepants, Fungus Among Us, because that's something that all of the people who love this season say, that there are some really bad episodes like season 6 level and some really good on the pre-movie level. I disagree. I just think that on the upper end, these best episodes are just okay. They're just solid. They're 6, 7 out of 10s. I don't think there's anything spectacular in this season, and a big dent into this season's quality has to be the animation. The atmosphere is so bland, and I have no idea how they got here from season 1 with the beautiful cell animation, how quickly the show has gone downhill since season 3. If season 4 can still be considered a mediocre season, which I also doubt, then season 5 for me is the first bad mid-season. And by that, I want to end this video. Thanks for listening to my rankings, and I tried to add in moving footage here, which was quite a task. So I hope it has paid off in making it more entertaining to watch. I will be probably back with new videos in, well, probably a few weeks. And whenever I continue this series, I can finally talk about the seasons that you guys all talk about, that you guys all hate, with these beautiful episodes like the Splinter and Boating Buddies, and give my opinions on that. And be sure to listen to some very, very hot takes. Not just in episodes that I dislike, but also episodes that I do like, such as Flea in Her Dome this season. But that will probably still take a while. See you in the next video.